Hi, guys. Welcome to episode number 82 of the For Animals for Earth show, Wildlife and Tourism with Melissa Matlow. I can't wait for you guys to meet Melissa. She is the Canadian campaign director for World Animal Protection. If you're not familiar with World Animal Protection, they're a global organization with offices in 12 countries, and they focus on ending animal cruelty and suffering forever. She's been working with them for 20 years, leading successful campaigns in animal welfare as well as environmental advocacy. Today, we're focusing on just a tiny piece of that pie, which is wildlife that's used in tourism and entertainment. I think this is an area that often goes unrecognized as it comes to animal suffering because that kind of like view we see from the front of it makes it look like these animals are okay, but most of the time they actually aren't. She works closely with travel brands to work on phasing out harmful wildlife tourism activities because big travel brands, they play a crucial role in influencing this industry because as consumers, we find brands that we like and people we like to book through, and then we trust that they are, weeding out that cruelty, but it's not necessarily happening. So she works together with those big brands. You'll hear her talk about how they collaborate to find practical solutions to end the exploitation of wildlife. Myself, personally, having been in and peripheral to the travel industry for most of my life, I find what Melissa shares today to be invaluable. It provides hope for changing our industry and also answers like practical answers for how to do it. So if you work in the travel industry and your head is spinning with ideas today while we're talking, I hope that you will dig in and follow up. I've pulled together a couple of follow-up resources and then of course all the links to World Animal Protection. So please reach out to them and share your ideas about working together because I think as you'll hear Melissa say, she's very passionate about collaborating and coming together. And this really seems like it's an area of animal cruelty that we can really very clearly make a difference in, and we already have been. So, yeah, jump on the bandwagon, right? So all of that, all those links, everything, they're in the show notes at foranimalsforearth.com/show/72. Thanks. Hi, Melissa. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Cruelty to animals in tourism and entertainment. It seems so commonplace that I kind of feel like it still amazingly goes somewhat unrecognized. I thought maybe we could start today by just grounding in what are some of the common ways that wildlife are used in tourism that is cruel?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it might be helpful to know that we estimated in a study that we did with University of Oxford's Wildlife Conservation Research Unit that there are more than 550,000 wild animals suffering globally for tourism. So you're right. It's common, and these animals are suffering in a variety of ways. Certainly, some are suffering in the wild because of overcrowding with tourism, going too far and getting too close to them. But many of these animals are kept in captive situations. Some are in what we would call roadside zoos. These are grossly substandard zoos that keep wild animals in, ramshackle cages, small, barren cages where they just don't have the space or any furnishings in their cage to stimulate natural behaviors. So that is a big problem. But animals are used, some animals are forced to perform tricks like circus style tricks and wildlife shows. I would say dolphins, whales, monkeys, seals, and sea lions are some of the common animals that are used in circus style shows. And of course, they're forced to behave that way, where they would never do these types of tricks that you see in these tourist venues in the wild. Sometimes harsh implements are used to train them, like they're quite literally, beaten with a bull hook. Dolphins would be forced to do these activities with frozen fish. People might not see that as being harmful, but it is changing their behavior and making them become just beggars. and really like just living for that frozen fish handout. And some of the activities they're forced to do would cause them, physical suffering, like beaching, for instance. A whale or a
Okay.
dolphin wouldn't you see them, beaching
Mm,
and or giving tourists rides or even their trainer rides, and that would cause, could cause physical harm and cause stress as well. So, but other examples are elephant rides, dolphins give rides. Um, Handled for photo ops and selfies. A lot of wild animals are used in that way. And wildlife farming. Sometimes wild animals are intensively raised and farmed for their meat or their skins, and that farm is used as a tourist attraction. So our simple rule of thumb for people who are overwhelmed by all this is just if you can ride a wild animal or get up so close you can hold or pet a wild animal or feed a wild animal, chances are it's cruel and don't do it.
okay. Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb to have because that's pretty clear.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's clear. We all want simple rules. Just like tell me what to avoid, right?
Exactly, exactly. And the way so many things are marketed, it really, as just an average tourist, you're led to believe that the animal is actually excited to interact with you.
Yeah.
It, lives for the day you arrive.
Yes, and there really isn't enough legislation to prevent these tourist attractions from claiming to be rescuing animals or being a sanctuary. A lot of roadside zoos will masquerade as a sanctuary. So there are tips would be if they're breeding wild animals for profit or they're letting you get close to ride or hold a wild animal, then it's not a sanctuary. A genuine sanctuary would not be for profit and it would not be breeding the animals because they would see captivity as the last resort that,
Mm. They would want them to be released back into the wild if they could be.
yes, absolutely. And stopping the captivity industry. So,
Mhm.
yeah, those are the different ways, but certainly you can harm animals in the wild, like if safaris are getting too close or if baits and lures are bringing animals close. Like shark diving is something where chum might be used to lure the shark to you. And, again, might not be seen as something particularly harmful or causing suffering. But if you think about it, if all these tourists are doing it, it is changing the shark's behavior and its ability to start migrating for food. And these are things we have to take seriously, especially with the extinction crisis and the impacts we're having on animals in the wild.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I was reading that wildlife tourism is, contributing in a pretty big way to the loss of biodiversity in the world as well.
Yes, it can be a harm, but it can also be leveraged for good. So, it could be an economic incentive for communities to keep wild animals in the wild and protected instead of hunting them for
Mm.
trophy and skins.
Mm.
So it just has to be properly managed. And that's something we're working on too. We've worked with World Cetacean Alliance to create wildlife heritage areas. These are top destinations for viewing wildlife in the wild, and that we are partnering wildlife organizations to work with the local community to protect the animals and meet best practices in wildlife viewing. So many people might be familiar with like whale watching experiences, and you can see if some of them are accredited to meet best practices. So that's for whales, but it's not for all species. So these would be destinations, and it wouldn't matter the species, there would be best practices that would be adhered to.
That would be really cool because that's like that kind of starts to open up this like glimpse of a window into what the future could be where animal lovers who are traveling could still, see and get to know these animals that you can never see anywhere else in your life, but in a way that's not harmful to them.
Absolutely. People want to see wild animals. And that's
Mhm.
why, even with the cruel attractions where they're kept chained and in tiny cages, what we found is that most people who visit these places, whether it's riding an elephant or swimming with a dolphin, they're doing it because they love animals and they want to get up close to them. They just have no idea the harm they're causing because a lot of this suffering happens behind the scenes. People just aren't aware.
Yeah, exactly. You've mentioned that, you kind of look at stopping wildlife tourism as a twofold process. One of them is cutting down on the demand, and the other is stopping the breeding. If we
Yes.
start to talk on the demand side, I know you work with travel companies, and that is one of the initiatives that you focus on to help lower demand. What does that work look like? What are you doing with them?
Yeah, we work with travel companies in two ways. One, we ask them to remove harmful attractions from their supply chain. And that work starts with the commitment. We ask them to sign our wildlife friendly travel pledge. And then once they've committed, we'll work with them to develop an animal welfare policy, and we'll help them implement that policy by training their staff, helping them with any communications, auditing their inventory, and even finding humane, sustainable alternatives. When they're wildlife friendly, then we ask them to use their power and influence to help change the wider travel industry sector. So that could come in many forms. Sometimes we do sign-on letters, and we use them to push a government to ban breeding and phase out the cruel attractions. Sometimes we go to the UN. The UN World Tourism Organization had developed ethical codes of practice for travelers. And so we work to try to push animal welfare to be considered. Unfortunately, we were not successful there, but we'll keep at it. And that's why we need these travel companies to work with us.
Yeah, you could see how there could be a lot of power behind large travel companies. And even if
Yes.
like it's brought up to the UN once, like sometimes I feel like you have to throw the carrot out there and get it in people's minds. And then when you come back again, it's a little more
Yes.
like expected.
Absolutely. And I do think there's a great chance, and we just the timing might have been off for the UN campaign, but we've certainly seen the success of these travel companies coming in and together with us. So in Thailand, we took a lot of companies that used to sell elephant rides and shows. We convinced them to stop selling them, and we took them to Thailand to actually share that they have a huge following and demand. And that was enough to move elephant riding venues to work with us to transition to observation only elephant friendly practices. So there's an example where they can actually say how many people they can bring to Thailand and how much money that is to shift. So we really need that kind of support. So it goes both ways. We certainly provide a service to them, and we need their power and influence to help make greater change.
Wow, that's amazing. It's just really cool to think of maybe people that were in a sector that cared about animals and loved animals, but maybe weren't aware of exactly what was happening. And then now they're on board, and now you've got this even larger army like working together. That's
It's
super
great. It's
cool.
so great to see. And with the elephant situation in Thailand's a hot spot for elephant riding there. I think there are more than 3,000 captive elephants across Southeast Asia. Most of them are in Thailand, and most of them are in pretty deplorable conditions. They're trained. I don't know if you're aware, but in order to train an elephant to accept a human on their back, because they would never do this in the wild,
Mhm.
they are, the young elephants are taken from their mothers at an early age. They're kept in isolation, and they're beaten so that they
Mhm.
fear people, and that's how they accept commands. But that bullhook needs to be around to remind them of that trauma. And as you know, elephants don't forget. So
Mhm.
that suffering might last a week, but the trauma really stays with them. Well, we were able to go there and move some of those elephants to elephant friendly venues where it's as close to a sanctuary setting as you can get. It's still a for-profit business, so it's not a true sanctuary. That's why we call
Mhm.
them elephant-friendly venues.
Okay.
And I know that's like jargony, but a sanctuary wouldn't be for profit. But
Mhm.
these people who own the elephants, that's their livelihood. Those
Mhm.
elephants can't be released in the wild. So the best thing we can do for them is keep them in the best, most natural conditions. So we still want tourists to go see them so the people who own the elephants can take care of them in the best conditions for life. So sometimes there's gray areas, right? It's not,
Uh-huh.
not every animal gets rescued in a sanctuary. There are some transition
Yeah. Right.
periods for these animals.
Mhm.
You can't just ban something and then problem solve. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the humans that it impacts, right? Because that's one of the
yeah.
arguments often for a lot of this industry is like, oh, but that's how they make their living, you know?
Yes.
And
And we take that very seriously.
mhm,
Yeah, livelihoods are so important. And sometimes poverty is one of the root causes that's driving animal
mhm,
suffering as well.
mhm,
And we do see a correlation that when you protect animals, you truly do protect people in the planet. And, the mahouts, the elephant
mhm,
handlers in Thailand, are the perfect example of that because when you go to a big elephant riding camp, it's dangerous. There are lots of elephants, there are lots of tourists. These are animals that could attack and kill people, and that's not a great condition, a working condition for the mahouts. They're constantly on alert. Their
Mm.
safety is at risk. Whereas at an elephant friendly venue, they're putting programs in place so the elephants can behave naturally, and they're very safe and protected from the elephants too. And you just really you just have to go visit, and you will see night and day conditions for both the elephants and the workers.
Wow, that's amazing. The travel companies, are there any travel companies that we would recognize that are working with you that people could look to? I guess they would look to them then to book their trips.
Absolutely. Yeah, there we've proud to say we've moved some of the largest travel companies in the world. So TripAdvisor, Expedia, those travel online booking platforms, booking.com, Airbnb had animal experiences and have removed cruelty. Travel Corporation is probably one of the largest travel companies you might not have heard of, but you probably heard of one of their 30 travel brands like Kentucky and Trafalgar.
Yeah.
Those are G Adventures, Intrepid. There's more than 200 travel companies around the world that have signed on to our elephant friendly pledge and have committed to no longer sell elephant rides and shows. And now many of them are going to be fully wildlife friendly. They started with elephants, and that was
Okay.
one of our main focus areas.
Mhm.
And now we're taking them on a journey to consider all the other ways that animals could be part of their supply chain, and how we need to move away from that to be fully
Yeah.
animal friendly.
Yeah, yeah. And what are some of the other areas that animals are being used in tourism that you're looking at?
So, swim with dolphins was another big
Mm,
focus for us, particularly being in Canada. A lot of Canadians go to sun destinations because our winters can be kind of brutal.
yeah.
So, Mexico is one of the top destinations, as is, well, the US as well, and of course, the Caribbean. And so, the most common wildlife entertainment activity North Americans, I think, would see is swim with dolphin
Mhm,
experiences,
mhm,
apart from roadside zoos.
mhm.
And a lot of people, the dolphin, they have that anatomical quirk that they look like they're smiling all the time.
Yes, right.
But as one dolphin scientist, a cetacean welfare expert said, like dolphins smile when they're dead. It doesn't mean that they're happy. And
Oh.
you see them in tiny tanks with a ball, and most people would think, oh, it's a ball, it's fun, like they're
Mhm,
just playing, they're playful creatures. But what you have to recognize is those tiny tanks, they're chlorinated, they're concrete. They're kept away from the dolphins are kept away from their pods, and they're basically just workers. I went to Mexico just to look at one venue for a whole day. And, for half an hour, one group of tourists will swim with the dolphins, get rides.
mhm.
Then right after, another group comes and another group comes, and that's all they do. And when the tourists go away, they're in a tiny tank. They have no place to go. They can't dive very deep. This is a highly intelligent, vast roaming, deep diving animal.
Mhm.
So to be in this small barren tank that's like less than 1% of their natural range is causes boredom, frustration, it causes aggression. You'll see the dolphins fight each other.
Okay.
And it's really sad. And the chlorine too, it can cause injuries with their eyes and their skin. So it's something that we really want to. I think elephant riding was easier because people saw the bullhook and the
Mhm.
chains and they understood it. Getting people to be aware of the harm caused to dolphins and whales in these tanks is a little harder because they just see them doing tricks and playing with a ball, and they look like they're smiling. So
Yeah.
that is a big focus for us, and I really hope we'll make big change in the next few years.
Yeah, yeah, and it feels like just awareness has got to go a long way on that because to your point, they do look like they're smiling all the time, and
Yeah.
the number of people who have told me, I live in Florida, and so people come here, right?
Yeah.
And the number of people, friends, who have said, "Oh, my dream to swim with dolphins," I mean,
Yes.
I would say maybe more people than not have that dream,
Yes.
and
They
it's like,
do.
and if they knew, of course, they change their minds.
Yeah, and in Florida, you can see them in the wild, which is amazing, right? And you can see them
Right.
behaving naturally in their natural pods. So there's such a great opportunity in many of these places. Mexico too. There's so much to see in terms
Mhm.
of wildlife on the coast or on land. So I think we are slowly seeing an attitude shift. Every time we do polling, we see a drop and declining acceptance for these activities. We're fortunate in Canada, our government banned the keeping and breeding of whales, dolphins, and porpoises in captivity in 2019. We took that information to Canada's biggest airline vacation companies and said, how could you sell an activity that Canada just banned, but you're selling it to Canadians in Mexico? That doesn't add up. And that message resonated with them and they removed them
Right.
from their supply chain. So
Oh, great.
where we are, it's a small dent because there's still many ways you can still
Yeah.
participate in those activities in these
Mhm.
destinations. But as more and more travel companies remove it from sales and educate. We always say, don't just silently do this. Tell your customers
Yeah.
why you do it. Be proud of this because we need to educate them so they don't do it independently.
Yes, yes,
So,
yeah, exactly. One area I see a lot of it is in cruise, like in the cruise line industry and excursions for people that are getting off
yes.
cruises. And I've heard that a lot of the big cruise brands use like global ecotourism councils to tell them what's ethical and what's not. Are you familiar with this
I
type of
am.
governing group?
Yes, I am. And actually, that's where, so we did a study. Where is our study? Let me just find. So this is interesting. What was it, 2018? We reviewed 62 Travel Trade Association guidelines. We found out of 62, only 21 advocated for sustainable tourism. Of those 21, only six communicated anything at all about animal welfare. And of those six, only three would have what we would deem appropriate animal welfare guidance. And of those three, only one's monitoring compliance.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
this is why we ask travel companies to work with us because
Mhm.
there isn't a good enough global animal welfare
Mhm.
standard that's being adequately monitored around the world for the variety of animals that are used in tourism. And unfortunately, legislation is just inadequate in most countries in this area.
That makes sense. I mean, I know in some countries, because you've been able to make headway in Canada, and you mentioned how the ban for cetacean animals, but also you're doing work now for more of like a wildlife tourism ban as well, right?
Yes, we are working in Canada in two ways. We're building off the cetacean ban by asking the federal government to pass a bill that's been introduced in our Senate that would ban elephant and great ape captivity. So it builds off that whale and dolphin ban. It's the same thing where if you already have them, you might be grandfather, but you wouldn't be able to breed anymore.
Mm.
That bill would also very importantly define the breeding would only be allowed for conservation benefit. I think a
Okay.
lot of people think that when zoos breed their animals, there is a conservation
Hmm.
benefit, but in many cases, there isn't.
Okay.
Those animals are primarily being bred for public display. They're not going to be released into the wild. Some are,
Hmm.
but we would more support, and I think, professional conservationists would support in situ breeding, which is breeding where the animal is in their habitat, where they are endangered. But a large variety of animals that aren't even endangered are bred just for tourist entertainment. So we are trying to get that ban in place in Canada. It's called Bill S15, and we hope it's going to be passed soon to the House of Commons, and then it just has a few more steps to become law.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And then in Ontario, we're also working to address the roadside zoo problem because believe it or not, or maybe you can believe it in the US, because I think you've had a Tiger King that became famous in a
Yes.
film.
Yep.
You don't need a license, a reason, or any experience or qualifications to keep a tiger in your backyard in Ontario unless there's a municipal bylaw. It is ludicrous.
Mhm.
And it's the only Ontario is the only province that doesn't have something in place
Oh,
to
wow.
license zoos and to keep them in check. And it's big, not only a big animal welfare problem, but a public safety problem. We see escapes happen, attacks,
Mhm.
and it's something that we're really focused on because Ontario has the most roadside zoos in our country,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is no surprise if there's no legislation.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting though that, people either moved there or, people that want to be in this business. It's not. what are the words I'm looking for? It's not like it's just like it happens like, oh, I rescued this cub and then, this turned into this business, but it's like I'm seeking out where I can continue to do this.
Well, yes, and that's why it's such a problem if it's just done at the municipal local level, because a ban happens in response to like usually it's reactive. Something happens in the community, like a tiger attacks a kid, then they ban tigers, but everything else is allowed. But that person just moves to another municipality. And so it really needs to be taken up at the provincial level. And then we're also working at the federal level just to stamp out what's not acceptable anymore. And I think
Okay.
people accept that elephants don't need to be in Canada in a zoo. It's really hard to take care of them in the winter. And they're such fast roaming animals as well, just like the whales and dolphins. So we hope to
Mhm.
keep moving in that trajectory.
Yeah, and you could see how I think it will. I mean, sometimes I wonder if I'm
Too.
in like a bit of a bubble because people around me do care, but it just feels like more and more people care every day, and that the biggest gap is knowledge
Mhm.
versus the want to kind of get rid of it.
I think so too. And I mean, we've seen zoos start to retire their elephants to sanctuaries. That's why we have the amazing elephant sanctuaries in Tennessee and California. There's one in Brazil. So it is people are starting to recognize that. Um, I do think more people want to see wildlife well, we know from polling that most people they would pay more to see animals in the wild. And they want to book with travel companies that have animal welfare policies. They want travel companies also to align with their values.
Mm,
So they trust them to provide the right information to them and make them aware of any harm that's happening that they, wouldn't necessarily be aware of. So I think this is definitely a trend, and we're going to see big change. We've seen circuses be phased out
that's
in
true.
many places and parts of the
Yeah.
world. So as more people, as the science evolves and more people understand and care about animal welfare, I do think it will be replaced.
That
These
makes
types of
sense.
attractions, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because I've also always felt like there's like a big marketing opportunity. I feel like for a lot of these groups to really lean in and say, hey, like we take animal welfare seriously and be transparent, tell the truth, tell what you know, like help guide
Yes.
people. To me, I'd be like, yep, sign me up, you know? Like,
Yes, I think there's a huge marketing opportunity. And it's also in this era where people leave bad reviews in TripAdvisor and social
mm,
media. Like now, your average tourist can share what they're experiencing so much easier than in the past. So I think, a lot of times when we meet with travel companies, we tell them like we're helping you stay ahead of the curve. Like we're
yes.
flagging risks to you because when a tourist has a bad experience and sees animal cruelty, they're not going to forget that. That really taints the
Mm,
experience they have when they're traveling. But of course, a lot of people don't have the budget to go necessarily to Africa or on these big excursions. But I mean, there's amazing native wildlife in your own backyard. Like
mm,
everyone has state parks, provincial parks, wherever you are in the world, and there is incredible opportunity to see those animals. And there's something, at least if we're looking after the animals in our backyard, that's something that everyone can really have influence over.
mm, that's true. That's true. It's something that even me, I've tried to get better about just spending time out there and
Yeah,
knowing who shares this space with me.
yeah.
Because I usually am like this way, that way, just going
Right.
so
You're
fast past.
You're just flying by, but there's a whole world out there between your house probably and your destination. And I know you had Rob Laidlaw on the
Hmm.
show before, and
Yes.
he's really taught me to appreciate and love reptiles.
Mm,
Never really thought much of reptiles before, just thought they stayed in one place. And if you really observe them for a small amount of time, it's incredible what you can see them do. And I think they're fascinating now. And I think we just need to, I think there's also something, being a parent, I know you're often kind of, um, wanting to have an experience catered to you that's easy
Mm.
or guaranteed, because you know your kid's going to have certain
Yes.
demands. But I think we need to educate kids and all, even adults, about the excitement of being in the wild and not knowing if you're going to see an animal. That can be amazing too. And then when you
Yes.
finally see it, it is so thrilling.
Yes.
But our society has come to like want everything just handed to us. So, we need to do our part in making that,
Yeah,
thrilling.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting because it makes me think of just Costa Rica. We've spent a lot of time in Costa Rica, and I love Costa Rica. And our very first trip there ever, we stayed in a place that was connected to a forest, and your interaction with wildlife was hiking. And you may or may not see, but we saw so many animals, and a lot of times we were the only people around. And that was another benefit to like
Yes.
just being out because when you go these places where it's set up and it's guaranteed, it's you and 500 of your closest
Yes.
friends with your
Yes.
camera.
It's not an authentic experience and it's a completely different uh and in the forest, like it's not just sight, right? You're hearing all the sounds, you're wondering what was that? What was that? And it could be a game for kids. And yeah, I mean certainly I'm biased, but my most thrilling experiences in nature have been a surprise encounter with wildlife and seeing them. It's something that really stays with you.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And hopefully it is with our kids making them like not be as excited about the opportunities where it's you and everyone else,
Yeah, well, and if you go to zoos, a lot of animals don't have privacy. And if you think about that, they're just being looked at all day. They should have a place where they can go to hide and sleep and rest and be outside of public viewing. So it's something we really have to shift. And fortunately, we are seeing zoos shift in that direction of higher standards, retiring animals like elephants. The Toronto Zoo here in Canada has a business plan that is all about any animal there has to have a purpose. So no longer will they breed animals for display. There has to be a conservation benefit. More and more zoos are looking at housing fewer animals to a higher standard and focusing on native species too. So I think that is, I'm hopeful that that's the direction that zoos are taking. There's already been significant changes since the first zoo and the old zoo of the past, but there are still many bad zoos out there.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, like still a little ways to go, I guess. But yeah, it
Yeah.
it
It's a
is
shift though.
definitely, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say it's like you said earlier, it's where we are today, I don't think in our, well, I don't know, maybe in our lifetime, but I don't know that we will see perfection in our lifetime. But you certainly hope that we are moving it for the next generations after us, that hopefully we're not too many generations away from what could maybe be perfection in terms of living symbiotically with the animals.
I would hope so. There's a lot of projects working on coexistence with wildlife, to not see wildlife as a nuisance, to
Mhm.
understand that we played a big role in coming into their habitat, and that's why we see them more. And certainly there's a lot of efforts to rewild, which is super exciting as well.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, it really is. If you were to kind of take everything you know around wildlife and tourism and try to simplify it into one thing that people could do, if they're going on these cruise ships or they're going on these trips to make a difference for animals that are used in wildlife tourism, what would you share?
Just one, huh?
I know, right? I was like, nothing like asking you to like do the impossible. You can share more than one if you have one.
Well, the number one rule of thumb, as I had said before, is if you can ride an animal or hold an animal or pet a wild animal, if it's wild and you're that close for a selfie, it's chances are it's cruel, don't do it. So avoid roadside zoos and animal entertainment parks. But I would also say use your influence as a customer and just book with travel companies that have an animal welfare policy. Then they've done the research for you and they can ensure that what they're offering is aligned with your values. And you can also go to our website at worldanimalprotection.ca to sign any of our petitions and letter writing campaigns to some of the lagging travel companies like Get Your Guide, which still
Mhm.
sells a lot of cruel attractions.
Mm. Yeah, and it's great that you guys have those campaigns where we can so easily just sign on and support it.
And it makes a difference. That's what moved
Mhm.
TripAdvisor and Expedia. So yeah, it really, all that makes a difference. Avoiding cruelty and booking with a good company. It's, one by one, we can make that difference to ensure all animals thrive. That collective power of all those individual actions really add up to make significant change.
It's amazing to watch you guys do it and you see it, right? And it's just, and you've been doing this for 20 years. I
I
can only
know.
imagine how much of a shift you've seen.
A big shift. Oh, absolutely. Just the fact that Canada bans cetacean captivity is about to ban elephant and great ape captivity is huge compared to where we started. And when I was started the organization in 2005. So we're seeing change. Sometimes if you're as compassionate about animal welfare and you're seeing all the things in the world that cause animal suffering, I know it can be really hard, but just know there are massive shifts happening, and we will end animal cruelty for entertainment. I'm confident of it.
I love it. I love it. And it is something, a thought that just came in my head as you were talking that I just wanted to repeat back was the fact that we can just by talking and making these choices. Okay, so here's what I want to say. When you see it, it's really hard, right? It's like there are so many videos out there of the cruelty. There's so much on social media. The feed is rough to look through,
Yeah,
but there is something that we can do, and it's simply join in behind World Animal Protection to support this. Go to travel companies that are doing this, just constantly talk about it with the people around us. And I think even
absolutely.
asking, like when you're booking,
Yes.
asking for
Ask.
things that are ethical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ask them if they have an animal welfare policy. Even if they don't, the fact that you ask is going to trigger their thinking. If enough people ask them to create one or raise this as something that matters to them, travel companies are going to pay attention. They're going to prioritize it. Just as you saw that the ecotourism councils and the sustainability bodies are missing that animal welfare piece. It's up to us to raise it to their attention. There has probably been more focus on wildlife conservation versus animal welfare, but it's
Mhm.
absolutely interconnected.
And with sustainability too, because that's one of the things that I feel like I notice is there's a strong movement in sustainability as far as the environment
Yes,
and ecotourism. And I'm amazed that a lot of times the animal welfare piece isn't right there with it.
I
And
know.
I'm like, yeah, like, come on, let's get the animals right up here with it. Yeah, with it at least.
Yes, absolutely. And it is, I mean, even how animals are, the demand to see elephants, for instance, and to ride them in Thailand, that demand leads to poaching elephants in the wild. So whether they're bred in captivity or poached from the wild, they still suffer. But absolutely, there's a conservation linkage from even the captive breeding and the demand.
Mhm.
So it is connected.
And I've heard that in Costa Rica, one of the women that I interviewed, her name's Vanessa Lozano, a few years ago from Costa Rica, and she had brought up how a lot of the like sloths or monkeys that you might be able to take a selfie with, most likely the mother was killed for them to be able to take that baby. And people,
Yes.
it's the backstory that you would never
Yes.
even fathom.
No, no. We had an undercover investigation into sloth selfies in the Amazon rainforest. So think about people who are wanting to go the rainforest.
Mhm.
Like they're probably self-identifying as ecotourists, right? It's a big trip to
Yes.
do. And they're holding these sloths, thinking that they're rescued by this family. And what our investigation found is those sloths were taken by illegal loggers, they were sold, and then the profit is made from the selfies. So whole trade that's happening there, but the unsuspecting eco-tourist is believing they're helping in rescuing a sloth or take care of an orphan sloth. So I was actually featured in a film called The Last Tourist. It's a great film for your listeners to take a look at because it doesn't only cover animal welfare and tourism, it covers children orphanages, volunteerism, even equity, women's rights. So the whole broad span of issues related to sustainable tourism is eye-opening. So I
Oh,
learned a
that's
lot,
awesome.
but I couldn't believe the intersections between our work and children tourism. I had no idea, but it's,
Mhm.
it's all the same.
Wow. Yeah. Which I guess is promising in the fact that it is all interconnected. So hopefully, as we're chipping at it in all these different places, it's
Yes.
ultimately getting to the big bulk of it in the middle.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. I have one last question for you. You have been working in animal welfare for so long, and one of the biggest things that I find as a topic that comes up is burnout. And I know we talked about this a teeny little bit as
We
we were jumping
did.
on, but I wondered if you'd share with everyone, what has been able to keep you going for 20 years?
Change. I would say if I hadn't seen change and I hadn't seen the impact of our campaigns, I think I would have given up a long time
Mm.
ago. That's what keeps me positive and driven, and that's why I wake up every day and just am a hard worker and keep going. And I often, we do a variety of different actions. We certainly work with travel companies, but we push them, we do demonstrations, and I've often wondered about the types of advocacy strategies. And when I see people who are angry, I totally sympathize why they're angry, but I wonder if it's because they haven't found where they can use their influence. And I am super passionate about helping people find their influence because everyone can influence someone. If you're a teacher, you influence kids. If you are a doctor, you can like help us change the way we eat and influence the overuse of antibiotics in animal agriculture. If you're an investor, you can pull money and redirect it away from cruelty. Like everyone has a sphere of influence, and we just have to tap into that and figure out where we can make the greatest change.
Yeah, that's amazing. A thought that it brings to my mind is that so often we picture, I think, people who are making decisions in these different businesses as kind of this like boardroom really far away. But the
Yeah,
reality is, all of our friends, we are all people who are working in this world, sitting in rooms, making
yeah,
decisions. And so it can just be the people next to you that you may
100%.
share information and it changes something.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with companies that are selling a lot of cruel stuff. They've got lots of staff. There's got to be one of us in there, right? That cares. So
Right.
it's finding them and figuring out how we can work together to make change from within as well. So always open to hearing from listeners who have an idea of where they can make a difference and how we can support them because our logo is the compass, and I've often felt it's perfect because we really do aim to direct people in the right way towards the solution for animals.
Oh, that's great. And that's a great thing to have top of mind too, a solution. Because I think that plays into what you were saying about like not getting the burnout. Because
Yes.
if you're looking for kind of like what's the long-term realistic solution that we can get to, that's step one to then go to the next step and the next step, like you were mentioning the stuff in Thailand, it's been a progression.
Yes.
Having that in mind, I think probably helps a lot.
Yes. You have to see what that end goal is and the steps to take it. And what's a goal? What's a lofty goal unless you know the steps to get there? And sometimes it's about being practical about those incremental steps because change doesn't happen overnight, but collectively it can, you build, you build, you build, and all of a sudden you have a big shift.
That's where I need the practice, is the practical piece, because I can see the big idea dream in the long
Yes.
run. It's
Yes.
like
It's
how do
the
you get
steps.
there?
And well, I mean, and often you need partnerships to figure them out too. And I've often really appreciated working with travel companies because they see a whole other layer that we don't necessarily see. And sometimes these projects, these campaigns, they're so big and complicated. The food system, for instance, World
Mhm.
Animal Protection also is working to change the food system, and it's so complex. So you need a number of diverse experts to come to the table to kind of figure it out. We all just know a puzzle. We can all just do one point of it, but
That's a
connection
really
is
good point.
great.
Yeah.
Sharing through podcasts is great. Coalitions are great. That's what helps us keep going too.
Yeah, that's amazing. If the best way for people to find you, World Animal Protection, and follow the stuff you're doing, what would you say?
Our website is www.worldanimalprotection.ca. You can find us on See, you're gonna have to edit this.
Lots of places.
Uh-oh, where you see us? I don't know this.
Pretty much
Instagram and
everywhere.
Facebook.
Okay.
Instagram and Facebook at World Animal Protection Canada. And we are on X at Move the World CA. And that's our Canadian organization, but we have offices in 12 countries, and you can follow all of them as well.
That's great. Yes, that's great. Thank you so much for
My
coming
pleasure.
on and for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And I really think it's going to introduce some new ideas for a lot of people.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on the show talking with you, and thanks for these great questions. And yeah, I hope I've inspired some of your listeners on what they can do, and just know that all of this change adds up.
Hey, gosh, wasn't that just a great episode? I love talking with Melissa. She has this way of making you think, like, yeah, this is possible. Almost like ending wildlife and tourism is like low-hanging fruit. Like, hey, guys, we can do this. We can do this. As a consumer, we can just not visit animal attractions. She gave her simple rule of thumb, like, if you can touch them, if you can ride them, um, just don't do it. It's most likely cruel. And I personally have made this change in my life over the past, I guess it's probably been 5 to 6 years that I'm like, okay, anytime that I've got this like feeling like maybe that's not ethical, I just don't do it. And over time, we are finding alternative solutions, sanctuaries. We go and visit sanctuaries. And I have been to some sanctuaries that I find a little questionable, but then I've been to other sanctuaries that I'm like, wow, like this is amazing. They are truly like only bringing animals in when they're rescuing them. They are truly trying to rehabilitate them and put them back in the wild if they can. And if not, they're, pinching every single penny to provide care for these animals. So, I feel like you can tell when you're there, you can tell kind of what's happening. So, that's on the consumer side. And then as a person working in the travel industry, I mean, man, like the the power to make change is incredible because by not offering these things, by taking these off the menu and also explaining to like your guests and your followers about why you're making that change, why you're not offering it anymore. I think it's just like that's how you help bring the masses along and also how you stop that money from continuing to feed that industry, and that kind of pushes into finding alternatives for those industries. So like Melissa had mentioned, reach out to World Animal Protection if you have ideas, if you want to work together. Also, if you'd like to add your signature to some of their campaigns, they have a big one going on right now for Get Your Guide. So Get Your Guide is, if you're not familiar with it, it's like a travel booking company that can help you find different excursions, different places. And they are like, there's like no effort to cut out animal cruelty. And this is not even, it's not like, oh, just in Thailand or Africa, I mean, in New York City. So, take a look. You can sign that petition. There's many more petitions. All that stuff. I've made it really easy for you with like bulleted links in the show notes. You can find those at foranimals4earth.com/show/82. That's also how you can get in touch with World Animal Protection. And yeah, wherever you're listening or watching, please like, subscribe, whatever it is you do. Please share this with a friend. If you can think of anyone who you think would be intrigued and find this episode interesting, please share it because this is definitely one of those word of mouth things. Melissa mentioned that in the episode, and I agree with her. I think it's true that this is definitely one of those solutions that can come from just doing a lot of talking, a lot of spreading the word, and a lot of just like openly sharing. So if you guys are willing to share it with people you think would be affected by it, then please do so. Yeah, I will be back in about a month with episode 83. Can't wait to talk with you all soon. Bye.